Good afternoon. I'm Maureen Hoyler, and I'm president of the Council for Opportunity in Education. The council is a network, an organization of colleges and community agencies that sponsor programs designed to get low-income first-generation students prepared for, enrolled in, and graduating from college. We have a special concern, and many of our programs have a special concern for individuals who are either pre-college, high school students that have an experience with the criminal justice system, and individuals that are currently incarcerated or formerly incarcerated. And this webinar is an exciting partnership with the Vera Institute for Justice to try to bring our two communities together. I'm going to give 2 minutes on TRIO, and hopefully we'll get more about these programs in subsequent parts of this webinar. So colleges and community agencies sponsor programs to assist individuals, adults and younger individuals get into college. And then they have another TRIO program, and that program with adults is called Educational Opportunity Centers. They typically serve large numbers of students, large numbers of clients, individuals that are not in college yet, and work with them on a short-term basis to make sure they get into college, get adequate financial aid, and enroll in the right courses. In addition, there are student support services programs and programs like student support services programs that work with students that are currently in college. And those programs are designed to provide assistance to address all the non-financial obstacles to being successful in college. Many of our participants on this seminar, who will introduce themselves when they speak, have participated in student support services, and some have gone on to create programs like student support services aimed particularly at incarcerated individuals or formerly incarcerated individuals. So I think that's enough about COE for now, and I'm going to turn it over to Alan at Vera to introduce himself and this partnership.
Thank you so much, Maureen. I'm Alan Wachendorfer. I'm a senior program associate with the Vera Institute of Justice. I just want to start out by saying thank you to Maureen and to COE for the ability to bring this conversation to, like you said, to both of our audiences. Thank you to our panelists for coming today to share the great work that you're doing. Thank you to the work that's being going on behind the scenes to make this happen. Angelica, we really appreciate you for that. And then last but not least, thanks to all of you in the audience for coming today. It's a really exciting opportunity to be able to have this conversation. I just wanted to say a little bit about our organization for the folks that aren't familiar with us. Vera is a research and advocacy organization that works to create a more just society. And the work that I do and my team does in this space is to expand access to post-secondary education. We work in nearly all 50 states, soon to be all 50 states, with providing technical assistance to corrections departments and their college partners to provide post-secondary education opportunities to incarcerated people. We particularly work with the Second Chance Pell Program, which is an experiment through the U.S. Department of Education that provides waivers to participating colleges to allow them to allow their students to have access to Pell Grants that currently they're otherwise banned from being able to utilize. We also were a significant part of a movement to overturn that ban that I just mentioned, which was successful. And we're looking towards implementation of that in July of 2023, which is why this conversation is particularly relevant. It's very timely. because in order to have access to high quality, equitable education, we need strong recruitment systems, student support systems, to be able to move students in, system impacted people into programs and through programs and completing, as Maureen said. And TRIO programs are a really great resource for that. Obviously we're here to talk more about what that means, or what that can look like, what it does look like. We know there are folks joining today that are not speaking, that are in the audience, that also provide some of these programs. So we encourage you to chime in the chat and say, you know, what kinds of relationships you have to system involved students already. Just a couple quick housekeeping things. Use the Q&A feature. We'll get to your questions. We're trying to save some time at the end to get to those. At least the folks that registered through Vera's link, a few of you had sent in some questions, and so we're gonna do our best to integrate those answers into the conversation today. But obviously, if we don't get to them, please put them into the Q&A box so that we can queue those up and make sure that we get those answered for you. And then if you have colleagues that weren't able to join today, we will be sharing this recording in a follow-up email. So we'll get this out to you so that you can have access to this conversation after today. So with that, I'm very excited to be able to introduce my co-moderator. I'll actually let her introduce herself. But I want to extend my appreciation to Brenda too for sort of helping me bring all this together. So with that, I'll pass it over to Brenda.
Thanks very much, Alan, and really thank you for your leadership in reaching out to the Council for Opportunity and Education and connecting the Vera community, these Second Chance Pell sites, to our TRIO programs more intentionally in order to serve more incarcerated and formerly incarcerated learners. My name is Brenda Danmesier, and I am a senior advisor for the Education Strategy Group. I was previously Rhode Island's post-secondary commissioner. I was the assistant secretary for the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education during the Obama administration, and was responsible for correctional education. But more importantly for this conversation, I was formerly the Rhode Island Educational Talent Search and Educational Opportunity Center director. And when I was the director of the Rhode Island EOC in the early 90s, Pell Grants were still available for folks who are incarcerated. And we, through the EOC program, served justice impacted students inside our correctional facilities before and after they were released. I had the brilliance really of, at that time, hiring Stephanie Cruz as the EOC counselor. And she is currently the Rhode Island Educational Opportunity Center director and the director of the Access TRIO Student Support Services program. And she continues the work that we started. And so, Stephanie, I'm going to turn to you for our first question. Can you describe for the folks in the audience who don't know what Educational Opportunity Centers do and how your program is currently working with incarcerated students in Rhode Island?
Thank you, Brenda. And it's so exciting to see so many people interested in this important work. So EOC, I think in the simplest terms, what EOCs do, and Maureen pretty much touched on this, is we work with adults who are interested in going back or pursuing a post-secondary education. And the population we serve are low-income, first-generation students primarily. The work that we provide is really a lot on the front end, getting folks into those programs of post-secondary education. And that requires assessing where they're at and finding out what it is that they're interested in, what they need. So oftentimes we're seen as the financial aid people or the college admissions application people, because that is a great deal of what we do. But it is that there are a lot of wraparound services that we provide that get the population that we're working with to get enrolled in post-secondary education. I know you had more layers to the question, Brenda, but I don't know if you want to,
Do you want to talk a little bit about how you're currently serving folks inside our correctional facilities and also when they're back in the community?
Sure, no problem. So if I could just back up a little bit, just in terms of the history, like Brenda said, we've been doing this since the early 90s. I was just newbie back then, but I spoke with the counselor who was doing that work back in the 90s, and she was largely responsible for building that relationship. And I think it's important for those who are now just trying to establish that type of relationship. And it wasn't easy work, as she put it. It took a lot of knocking on doors and persistence, and the support of Brenda as the director in getting us in. And once we did get in, it led from one facility to the next to the next. And what we've done since the 90s is to work with this population, meeting with them on site to assist them with that process I just talked about, looking at educational options, doing the work to place them in the right facility, the right institutions, doing the financial aid, admissions applications, and working with them not just while they're in the Department of Corrections, but once they've been released. And we work with them to make sure that they're getting the support that they need once they get enrolled in the institutions, and then working with them consistently to make sure they have the sufficient financial aid, as Maureen mentioned, and that they are persisting in their program of education.
Stephanie, your institution, the Community College of Rhode Island, also is a Second Chance Pell site, and you're providing services to them through that program as well. Is that correct?
That's correct, and it's very important for us at this point. 2 years ago, when the world shut down, I think the Department of Corrections shut down even tighter. And so we were no longer able to get to the population that we've worked with for over 30 years. And so when CCRI, the Community College of Rhode Island, became one of the pilot institutions for the Second Chance Pell, we were able to work with them to provide those services to this population. And it's been very rewarding to be able to be part of that process. And I'm particularly grateful as we transition, as Alan mentioned, in July 2023, that's the big date when it becomes widely available. And we need to be ready and prepared to really work hard with this population that so needs and deserves it.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. And if you have questions for Stephanie, as Alan mentioned, there'll be a Q&A section at the end, and you can put your questions in the chat. Next up, I'd like to ask Joe Lewis. Could you describe what student support service programs do in your experience as a student support service participant? And also, please explain to everybody what you're currently doing.
Thank you very much. So the way that my mentor, Diana Felix, kind of promoted it to me is that student support services programs brainwash our students to transfer and achieve master's degrees, right? So it's our goal to kind of support our participants to reach their dreams. And I think even more importantly, kind of like for myself as someone who's formerly incarcerated and was an SSS participant, is to introduce them to dreams that they may have never had. You know, I remember one of my first conversations with her, she talked to me about writing a thesis. You know, and as a high school dropout, never knew nothing about that. I didn't even know what a thesis was. But I think in that, what she had was that she believed so much in me that I would be able to write this, that she uttered the magical words that she would support me through the process. And this is me at community college to the end of a master's degree. And at the end of it, she supported me and sat on my thesis committee. If I could, I'd have her on my dissertation committee, but now that I'm in the PhD program, there's more rules and I push, but I can't have her on the dissertation committee. But I think this is one of the things, as a prime example of what SSS programs can do, is to kind of promote students to achieve things that they never thought were capable of. And I think for my role, when I left Mount San Antonio College, transferring to my 4-year degrees, I always wanted to come back and work in an SSS program. That was my dream. But eventually, now that I'm back in Mount San Antonio College, I work in Rising Scholars. And so Rising Scholars is a program that serves formerly incarcerated students and STEM impacted students at Mount San Antonio College. And so in my dream and in my development of these programs, what I began to do is I modeled the SSS model, right? And I think the most important thing that I was taught is that TRIO personnel are those that have the biggest hearts for students. And so I began to do that with my staff and make sure that they have the biggest heart for their formerly incarcerated students, for their STEM impacted students. And so that's what I do now, on top of doing research on the strengths of formerly incarcerated students, right? Because oftentimes research comes out about how education helps recidivism and helps this and helps that. So my goal has been to paint us in a light as people that have been incarcerated, that we have strengths, that we have knowledge, that we enter the institutions, right, with all this to give. And it takes somebody like Diana Felix to support us to bring it out. And so that's what we do at Rising Scholars in a nutshell. I could give you the particulars, but I think that's what we do. We provide those that may not be looking at the stars, right, a direction to look at. And so I really, that's what we do at Rising Scholars, but I brought it with me from TRIO.
That's a beautiful story, Joe Lewis. And can you talk a little bit about the program and the numbers of students that you're serving, and
So,
how responsive is the institution to your work?
So the institution has been very responsive, and I feel very supportive because I've set up 2 programs now, one at Rio Hondo College and this one at Mount San Antonio College. And I guess I might be the starter up for programs, and I'm constantly getting calls like, hey, you want to come work over here? But I feel really comfortable with what I'm doing here at Mount San and the support that I get. You know, I think oftentimes formerly incarcerated students want to go back to those institutions that have given them that launching pad. And so right now in our program, we have, I want to say, about 260 students. And so these 260 students are at some point in the process in getting involved in education, right? Some of them are applying. What I tell my team is, we're not the A team, we're the B team. We'll be here when you get here, we'll be here when you leave, and we'll be here when you get back, because a lot of my students sometimes transition in and out of the programming, right? They stop out for a semester, but I find it for some reason, they always come back, right? My students will relapse and leave, but they come back. So I think the untraditional model of our program is that these 260 students come in and out of the system, but they always feel safe to come to us, either when they get clean or when they get re-released. And so those are the things that we kind of do. So we have 260 students. One of the things that the institution did great on is formerly incarcerated students don't walk around advertising that they've been incarcerated. But what we did is we added a question to our application. And since it's an open entry, it's not a question of a qualifier, but it's a question that says Mount San Antonio College has a Rising Scholars program that serves formerly incarcerated students and STEM impacted students. Do you identify in this manner, and would you wish to receive services, right? It's not asking, have you been incarcerated, but it's asking, hey, we have these services for you. Can you use them? So that's also helped us to identify a lot of students. And through that, we've had about 1,000 students since last fall check the yes box that we're trying to get to all these students.
That's a fantastic service that you're providing, and allowing students to really be able to access the services that you're providing. I hope you'll take a moment to read the chat. Folks have been inspired in the few minutes that you presented your story about the work that you're doing. So thank you very much, Joe Lewis. I'm going to turn it over to Alan. Thank you.
Thanks, Brenda, and thanks so much, Jill, for sharing some of that experience. It's so important, and like Brenda said, folks in the chat are inspired by it. Before I turn to James, I just wanted to throw one question out to the audience while we continue the conversation. If you can drop into the chat, whether you're here from a Department of Corrections or a Second Chance Pell site, or if you're from a TRIO program, and if you are from a TRIO program, let us know, if it's a ELC or Student Support Services. We're trying to get a read of like who's in the audience, and so do that while we continue the conversation, and I really appreciate that. So I'm gonna ask James up to the microphone next. Why don't you, James, please just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself. My understanding is you've had some experience with EOCs in the past, so share some of that with us. And then, as you get into all of that, we absolutely want to know what you're up to now and how you're supporting students now.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, everybody, for having me. And I'm going to kind of build off of what Joe said, because I totally agree. I had come up with a concept. It's dreams go deferred, so we can fit in other people's boxes in order to pay other people's bills. And at some point in life, I had deferred the dreams that I had, let go of education at an early age, actually in the 8th grade, so I can get a job, just because I didn't understand education and the pathway or the relation to success. Found myself incarcerated. And I just remember I was always in lockup. Just didn't have a clue. I was young, dumb, and thought I had everything to prove, which ended me up incarcerated inside the facility in lockup. And I would read a lot. I would read a lot of books. And somebody sent me down the GED book, and I would read the GED book. They would let me out for a little while. I would take a test, pass it, then I'd do something stupid and go right back to lockup. And I'd study some more, come out and take a test. And I just kept passing my test because I was very well read inside the prison. And I remember one time when I was out of lockup, I went down to the library to go get some books, and I was introduced to an EOC officer, which was Sharon Brown, and she began to talk to me about education, post-secondary education, that I knew nothing about. She opened something up in regards to a pathway for me that I could see, like, whoa, maybe this is a way out of the situation I had landed myself in. Because the truth of the matter is, I didn't really understand or see a way out. And from that, it was while Pell Grants was still in prison, I registered. And I just remember she had me fill out these papers, and then they sent me this yellow form back saying, like, I needed to, like, provide additional information. So I ran back down there, and I was like, they sent me this, what do I do with it? And she basically told me what I needed to do, and what I couldn't do, she did for me. And I ended up getting financial aid inside a prison, and I was allowed to take college courses. And to me, it was like, wow, I can do this. And from there, I mean, one thing led to another, and I ended up later on receiving my associate's degree inside prison. And then upon release, I got my bachelor's degree. And the truth of the matter is, I haven't had to look back since. I look at it now as like, it starts to become easy to be locked up in prison, because everybody's on the same playing field. The hardest thing in life is to be locked out of society. And what education did was give me true freedom, which is not actually physical. What true freedom is having choices. And today, because I have my education, I have choices. I have choices of where I want to work. I have choices of where I want to go, and I'm able to compete for adequate paying employment. My thing is, once you have that freedom, it's only right for you to give it back. So I created a program called the Reentry Campus Program that helps currently and formerly incarcerated people finish the post-secondary education they started behind prison walls once they're released. Heavily reliant on prior learning assessment and portfolio development, because there's an enormous amount of learning that happens in prison outside of academic settings that should be reviewed and assessed for credit. And to date, we've had approximately 200 students go through the program. We probably had 30 college graduates, and they're all, I'd say at least 80% of them are working in the field that they went to school for, and they in turn have freedom. But if I look back on the trajectory, I know it all started with EOC, just again, to add to Joe's point, showing me a different way and giving me my dreams back. That the truth of the matter is, I didn't even know existed. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Such a great story, and we really appreciate you sharing that. So you're not actually a designated TRIO program yourself, but I imagine that you probably, or unless I'm wrong, but I imagine you lean on those programs to some degree. Can you say a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I lean on the same TRIO program that helped me when I was incarcerated. They go up to the prison. I believe it's twice a month. It's always on Tuesday. And for our students, the ones that go through our prior learning assessment program, when they're ready to be released, what we do is we connect them with the EOC program. That's the TRIO program that's happening behind the walls. I believe it's still Justina now. Justina goes in, helps them with their financial aid. And it's important because there's a lot of things that need to happen behind the walls before somebody's released. Because a lot of times if you wait for somebody to be released, you've already lost them. So to have these programs inside prison to kind of help individuals with that, with obtaining resources prior to release is it's just like a no-brainer. Yes, we do work with them.
And where are you doing all this work?
We work inside the Department of Corrections. We're in every Rhode Island Department of Corrections. We're in every facility, max, medium, minimum, women's, and high security unit.
Great. And then, and I don't know if we asked that of Joe, but you're out in California. Is that right, Joe?
Yes, I am in California.
Okay, great. All right, thanks, James. I know we're going to get back to you. I'm going to switch over to Cindy now from the great state of Kansas, who is in the Department of Corrections there and is going to tell us about the work that she's done to bring TRIO programs to support students there in the Kansas Department of Corrections.
All right, well, hi to everybody. Kind of working with a scratchy throat, but we'll do the best we can here. So I wanted to let you know that, so I've been partnering with TRIO for over 20 years, and it started when I was working in a nonprofit organization out in the community and attended networking meetings with a TRIO representative, or an EOC is who I've been working with specifically. And we talked and I realized, hey, these guys are experts at this stuff of working with people and who want to go to school. So I started referring people, because I was in a workforce development position, started referring people who are interested in schooling to the EOC program. And then later on, when I started going into correctional facilities to give workshops, and TRIO did also, or the EOC did. And so they would go in and give workshops to the guys and take in information about the programs coming in, and we would partner together sometimes and go together. And then they would help them individually if they needed information. They would send back information to them. And so it was kind of done on that basis. And then later I transitioned over to working for the Department of Corrections. And at that time, the facility that I worked with, and so he said, I'm in Kansas, right? Well, I'm in Western Kansas. So at that time, the closest facility was like 25 miles away. So that was very close for us. And so I asked them if they would come in and start meeting, in addition to doing the workshops that they were doing, if they would start coming meeting individually with the gentlemen that were looking at wanting to go to school, pursue their education. Some needed to get their GED. And they jumped on it and came in, and they started coming in, and we had to laugh because the unit that I was in only had about 300 guys in it, but I at times would have 40 that would have signed up to meet with the EOC representative. And they were like, 40? I'm like, well, yeah, okay. Well, I put them in release date order, so you don't have to worry about meeting with all of them, but they would come in and they would meet with them and give them information. And so that continued on. And then during that time, I changed facilities that I was working at. So now my closest one, which is still the same one, is 2.5 hours away. So this was too far for them to be able to come and do that at this facility. They continue doing it at the previous facility that I was at, as well as another one. But so when I came to the new facility, we arranged to start providing services virtually. And so that was a nice addition to have. And we did that for a while, and then COVID hit in 2020 and everything shut down. They were working from home. I was working from home. So we really, that kind of put a screeching halt, and we are just now ramping back up. But that has been amazing to work with them. So, they've been able to help with so many things. And I will say that these are not all current students that they're working with. These are gentlemen that want to be a student, that maybe didn't think they could be. And the EOC has worked with them. And in many cases, they come in and they say, well, I'd like to go to school, but I have this debt. You know, I got arrested while I was going to college, and I owe money and I don't think I can. And so they'll work with them and help them to get either student loans put into deferment or help them get them out of default. They've been able to work with them to set up the income-based repayment. And in some cases that's been zero, but they would get their monthly pay stub that said, you've made your monthly payment of $0.00. And so that enabled them to be able to get back on the path to be able to take out a Pell Grant or student loan again. So that has been amazingly helpful for the things. And they've just been so encouraging. They've worked with them that had debt consolidation issues. You know, it's just all those messes that they would leave behind a lot of times. And so they have gotten on the phone with those loan companies where they had their student loan and helped them navigate through talking to that company on how they needed to respond and what this meant and what that meant. And you know, they're just so responsive. I just can't say enough good things about the EOC program. And so, you know, that was my piece. Well, we have 9 different correctional facilities in the state of Kansas, and basically over half of our facilities are served by an EOC program, a TRIO program. So some are saying, and I saw some logged on, you know, out of our University of Kansas, serves different facilities. The community college out of Kansas City, community college does. The one that I worked with was Barton County Community College. And so there's a lot of different opportunity that they've been able to help with and connect those guys back with those educational opportunities. I will say there was one cool instance where they also help them out with admissions for school. So if they're trying to apply, they help them out with that admissions forms. And as you all are probably familiar, you know, that in a lot of cases, if someone is working with an EOC, that college will waive that admission fee for them, which is extremely helpful, because if they're coming out of incarceration, they don't have a lot of funds. In some cases, they have none. You know, so that's been very, very helpful too.
So I heard you say things like completing the FAFSA, getting loan defaults resolved, past debts with other colleges, admissions process. Are there other things you can think of that and then obviously just there's like that inspirational part of like digging into somebody a little bit for them to see for themselves that the possibility is there for them. Are there other things that you want to lift up to that TRIOs have helped your students with?
Well, a lot of that, you know, with the finding a career, you know, that's something that I work with them too. I work with them on employment, but of course, education and employment go directly hand in hand. And we have a community college that is at the location that I'm at now, which services them, and they're a second chance Pell Grant recipient. And so they're working with them on second chance Pell. And we also, in Kansas, we have a strong educational component that we've put in and have the community colleges in all of our facilities. And I know that one thing that we're working towards is integrating that EOC, that TRIO program, into working with those navigators that are in our programs to be able to partner and provide those services with them. So a lot of them, you know, it's just amazing because I mean, I'm on the inside in the facility, so we'll provide support. But you know, something that James said and that Joe talked about was that person coming in and providing that hope for them too, and saying, yes, you can do this. You can do this. And that's pretty amazing to watch that and watch that confidence bloom and the excitement. And they're so eager to work with them. and really appreciate the acceptance of the EOC working with them on that. And I know we had some questions that had come through. One was about some of the challenges, or what are some of the things to look at coming into a correctional facility. So from our side of things, we need to look at, well, of course, there's background checks that are done for anybody coming in, and there's training, volunteer training that has to be done with people coming in. So there are some things like that, logistics. Like I said, we're 2.5 hours away. So for us, virtual is a way that we can partner with EOC at this point. Some of the things, I know I saw a question that had asked about some of the things on transitioning out, on some of the challenges of people who are releasing. And what we'll see, something with this population that I think is pretty consistent, is a lot of times they are not real good at reaching out for help. And that's something that I've seen the EOC be so good at, working with them and kind of recognizing that and offering those things of help and checking in with them. Are things going okay? And being there and willing to help them through places that they need some assistance.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Cindy. We have more questions for you and for everyone. I'm going to give your voice a quick break. Before we open up, there's a few questions we want to ask of the panelists to sort of keep the conversation going. But before we do that, I want to launch a quick poll, just another kind of temperature check, who's out there and what you all are doing. And hopefully I can do this without messing it up. So here we go. I think it brings up both questions at the same time, so you can just take a quick moment to answer those. And the first one is about if you're a second chance Pell site, do you already work with your local TRIO program? So we have a lot of no's, a lot of not sure's coming in, a couple of yeses. So all the more reason to have this conversation, right? So we can figure out how to get those not sure's answered and those no's to yeses. The other question is about if you work with a TRIO program, what kind of services you provide. So we have a lot of answers coming in about financial aid advising and application assistance, as Cindy was just describing, admissions, college readiness. Really, it's all of the above. Obviously, there's a lot of things that can be provided with access to TRIO connected programs. So I'm gonna just leave this open for a few more seconds here. The last couple folks to answer this. And everybody can see these answers too, right? Or do they come up with that when I end it? When I end it? Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and end the poll. And share results. Wow, they've made this easier than it used to be. So that makes me look better. All right, so you can see we have quite a few folks that don't currently work or are unsure about whether they work with TRIO programs. And there seems to be a good split between financial aid advising and admissions assistance as the type of services that are being provided, and then another mix of college readiness, mentoring. Awesome, thanks so much for taking a moment to answer that. So I think now I'm going to pass it over to Brenda, and just Brenda, for your just a heads up for you, if it makes sense. After you kind of launch into this one, when it comes back to me, I can actually get into some of those questions that we had on that list. If they weren't answered, I'll kind of check a few of those off as well, just so you know what's coming.
That sounds great, Alan. Thank you. So I have a question for any one of our panelists who would like to answer. If you could talk either from a Department of Corrections point of view, Cindy, or from an EOC perspective, Stephanie, and from your own experiences, James and Joe Lewis, How would a TRIO program that wants to work with incarcerated individuals, what do they need to do? How does that happen? Who wants to answer first?
I can kind of tell you what happened with us is we just did it. We just, I asked them if they could come in and they got permission with their TRIO folks. And
So who did you ask?
Well,
And
well,
how
I-
did
I
they know?
worked with
Suppose
the-
they don't have somebody like you
okay.
in the department, or don't know somebody like you at the Department of Corrections. How do they make an introduction? How do they get introduced to folks at the DOC so they could talk about their program services?
I would say for them to go ahead and get a hold of the facilities if they want to, or talk with that and maybe start out with whoever the contact, and they'll kind of generate them probably towards the reentry services is where they would do that, because it would generally, and I know each state is different and each facility is set up differently. And that's kind of part of the challenge too of working with it, across the board, but working with them and say they'd be willing to come in if they have an educational program that goes in, maybe talk with those folks.
Do all the facilities have an education coordinator or a principal of the education program? How does that work? Should they go to the director of the Department of Corrections, or should they go to the education department? Or does it matter? Doesn't matter. You just.
And I can only answer for Kansas. In Kansas, we do have them in every facility in Kansas. And so in the past, and this is all changing, and I know we have our education director, I think, is on this webinar too. So she may want to jump in when you open it up or whatever, but they could go to the facilities. They could maybe get on our website and find out who that educational director is, because it should be listed on the DOC website on there, and contact through that way. And then make arrangements for the individual facilities. And I know a lot of it will be logistics. They're involved, with how exactly what kind of services and how they can deliver those services.
Thank you. James and Joe Lewis, you might want to talk about your experiences as well. James?
Yeah, I would say I work closely with the principal of the Rhode Island Department of Corrections for Education. And I think it's very important to get the buy-in from the DOC, whatever facility that you're working with, because things just become more streamlined and easier. Then I can actually go to her and I can get everybody inside the Department of Corrections educational levels, their cell location and where they're at. And through that, I can strategically send out information to each individual who meets the criteria for this program, high school diploma or GED. Or I can actually print out flyers and have them put in each of the living quarters. There's usually information boards inside each of the living quarters that educational and programs that are posted to. So I could post that. And then also I would work closely with the counselors, and I would work closely with the discharge planners, the transitional planner unit, and I would definitely work closely with the teachers. And what we do for our program is we send out a quarterly newsletter to all of our students, which usually things end up in one cell, they'll end up in somebody else's cell later. So put them in the day room. So they just get passed around through each other. But these are the ways that we reach out and let students know, potential students know what's going on, what's available to them, through those avenues.
Thank you, James. Joe Lewis, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I think for us at Mount SAC, it's been a little harder because California is so large, and then community college systems are broken up into districts. So sometimes other community colleges are very protective of their districts. So what we've had to do is have a more kind of presence in the parole offices. And so making sure that we have good relationship with parole officers, that parole officers know who we are. And then here in Los Angeles County and a lot of the counties in California, they have a once a month meeting called parole and community team meetings, where those that are coming home are mandated to go once they've been released. So having a presence there, making sure that those parole officers once again know what Rising Scholars does at Mount San Antonio College within the office that's in our district, because oftentimes a lot of districts have different offices. So making sure that they just are aware of what happened, putting up flyers in their offices and stuff like that. But for us, it's been really difficult getting on the inside, since there is no prison within Mount San Antonio College's physical boundaries of what our district serves.
Stephanie, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything.
Not much other than to say, I said earlier how it was difficult initially for us to get into the system, and to go back to something Cindy said, or even James, once we got to that education person, that was the person that got us that entry. And then once we were there, we were able to build those for other relationships, but that was the key person for us back in the day.
That's great, really helpful, I think. And it really is, as everybody's mentioned, about building relationships with folks in the community and inside. And I know firsthand how much the Department of Corrections in Rhode Island respects James's voice, his services, and his presence, and they are always supportive of the work that he wants to do inside. So it really is important to build relationships. Alan, I'm going to turn it over to you for another poll question, I think, and then you're going to ask another question.
Yeah, both poll questions got asked at the same time. I would just add to this, to the answer to this question too, given that Vera has such strong relationships with all of the departments of corrections. I would offer that if anybody's listening right now and they've been trying to get in contact with the DOC and struggling with that, reach out to us, because I'd be happy to, to connect to the education department and your respective Department of Corrections, and and then go down from there to the facility level. I definitely want to reiterate the importance of building those relationships across the board, but I just wanted to offer that one piece as well. I want to flip this question to the colleges though, and say if you're a college that's listening right now and wondering, how do I do outreach to is there a TRIO program on campus, or how do I get involved and utilize TRIO programs to help my students that are incarcerated or formerly incarcerated? What would they do? And I'm passing that question as to anybody on the panel that wants to answer that.
Well, Ellen, why don't I say the same thing that you just said? If there's any prison or correctional office that would like to know which TRIO programs they might reach out to, we at COE would be happy to provide that link.
And since you're on, Maureen, can you say a little bit about how TRIO programs are they're funded and maybe housed within a particular college, but can they serve other students?
So it is important to understand the difference between educational opportunity centers and student support services. But TRIO refers to a set of grants, federal grants, that go to colleges or community agencies. And we've been talking mainly about educational opportunity centers that provide shorter term assistance to get financial aid, to advise clients, to provide career counseling, to provide admissions assistance, and academic advising for the first courses that an individual might take. Student supports and those programs, educational opportunities programs, typically serve 800 to 1,500 individuals. So if you reached out to an EOC and said you're a Department of Corrections or an individual facility, could you come in and help us? Whether you had 20 individuals that needed assistance, that type of assistance, or 100, very often they would say yes. Another set of grants are student support services grants, and those go to colleges to support retention and transfer of students who are low income and first generation on their campus. They typically serve 120 to 300 individuals. And on most campuses, there is a, while your individuals who are currently enrolled in college, taking college courses in prison, incarcerated, would be eligible for student support services. On most campuses, there's so many more individuals that are eligible and need service. You would probably be less likely to be able to get that type of support from a student support services program. COE has a legislative proposal which would allow student support services programs to get additional funding to serve a subset of students that may be involved with the criminal justice system. But that will require action. That's not something that would happen, that we could do right, that TRIO Student Support Services could do right away. So it would be very important to connect students, clients, individuals who are currently incarcerated and moving out of the system to a student support services program if they want to continue their education. And I think that's something we could work on together as well. But I don't see at the immediate time the chance of many student support services programs serving currently incarcerated programs. Currently incarcerated individuals. Others may have a different point of view on that. But it's just that the demand is very high on campuses.
Maureen, did you also want to talk about Veterans Upward Bound, since so many veterans are?
Oh, we also have Veterans Upward Bound, which is a pre-college program that can be more intensive, helping individuals get both skills and transition into college. So that's another program. There are fewer Veterans Upward Bound programs than there's less than 200 Veterans Upward Bound programs. There's more than 1,000 student support services program, but that would be a program that might be appropriate as well.
Has there been any conversation about having a specific group, a TRIO group like Veterans Upward Bound, but concentrated on system impacted people?
Yeah, could you ask that again?
Well, like Veteran Upward Bound, could there be a similar one that would be?
There could be, that's correct.
Okay. Has there been conversations about that happening?
More, the primary conversation is if a current Upward Bound program wanted to create a subset of services for system impacted individuals. That's kind of where we focused our attention right now.
Got it. Thank you. So there's a couple, so well, let's talk about that a little bit more, and it might be
I have another question I can ask folks, Alan, if you want.
no, go ahead, Brenda.
Sure. This is for any of the panelists. If, obviously the point we were trying to make also with the questions and explanation about TRIO programs is a way to figure out how to expand these services to folks. But can the folks on the panel talk about barriers to expanding programs inside correctional facilities and once students are back in the community? Can you speak about the barriers that you've encountered in expanding services? Not only the limitation of TRIO programs, but generally speaking from your own experiences.
I think some of the barriers is like colleges, prisons aren't set up as college campuses, and colleges aren't really set up as prisons. So there's like a disconnect there that needs to be understood. And I think education programs that are happening behind the walls were heavily reliant on face-to-face in-person learning, which COVID really exposed that we need to rethink this. And I think like prior to the crime bill being passed and like the prison population had lower numbers, maybe this sort of system worked. But when we ballooned the prison system to over 2.5 million people, we also increased the want and need for educational services, which prison systems aren't set up structurally to be able to provide academic programming for this amount of students. And it's almost impossible. So I think one of the hugest barriers that we've noticed is space constraints in regards to the amount of people that want and need these services. And also just time. Usually you can't get into these programs unless you're, because of space constraints, you don't get into these programs unless you're serving a significant amount of time. And then if you're not serving a significant amount of time, by the time your number comes up to access this program, you're already out the door, so they won't let you in because you're not going to be there long enough to like benefit. So because they're looking for completion. So I've seen some of the barriers. It's just really just it's structural, and it's just from a lack of understanding of the two systems. So my thing is there needs to be something in between those to help guide and navigate this problem. So.
Joe Lewis, yeah, please.
Something that I've seen as I work on the other side, right, as students are being released and coming home, is oftentimes they might take classes at different sets of institutions. That creates a barrier for them to receive transcripts, or not even just transcripts, but like sometimes the institutions, they might think they're taking a class that's credit counting towards a degree here in California with a for-profit institution that doesn't count, right? So then they're not told, you know, this might not count, right? They're not given that. Another one is sometimes specific colleges that are working in specific prisons are only offering specific degrees, right? There's a college that only offers business degrees here in the state of California in a particular prison. So when those women are released, they come to Mount Sac or they've been to Rio and they're like, well, I have all these business degree credits, but I don't want to do business. But because here in California, for every A they get, it's 21 days off their sentence, they're taking these courses, but they're also, in essence, doing degrees that they're never going to complete. So when they come here, I think the importance of like an SSS program that has an academic counselor is able to decipher through all these transcripts and all those courses and be like, okay, what would you like to do? Okay, you want to do communications. Okay, we could use this class to satisfy this. We could use this class to satisfy this. We could use that class to satisfy this. And that's the importance of having an SSS program on campus once they come home, because as James alluded, right, there's 2.5 million people that have been incarcerated. 95% of those people are coming home, right? And they're coming home with various institutions of credit that you need to sit down and help them. Sometimes we have to pay for transcripts. Sometimes we have to wait for the student to get all their transcripts, so we're not having them take classes that they might have already taken. You know, and I think if prisons could help them with that transcript, right? And that's on top of housing insecurity, food insecurity, job insecurity, you know, substance abuse, trauma, right? All these other things. And then you're like, well, where are your transcripts? I think so that's the beautiful thing about having an SSS. And so SSS has helped low-income first-generation students with disabilities. So as a byproduct, right, of poverty in our country, a lot of formerly incarcerated students fit these bills, but sometimes the SSS programs themselves are not equipped to provide direct services, right? Like intentional service, like a Rising Scholars program that kind of understands this, that sometimes students take classes in a prison. They might take a class at Rhode Island that might be from Coastline Community College here in California, right? Because it's a distance learning class. So then that also creates another barrier where the students are flagged as out-of-state students, right? But they've been, so California students will take classes outside of California, come to Mount Sac and be like, oh, I took classes at this institution that was in Arizona. And then now they're trying to charge them out-of-state tuition. So we have to advocate and let them know, like, yeah, they've been a resident of California for the past X amount of years because they were here. And navigating that, right? Like getting letters from parole officers, getting released big documents, that those are the barriers that they face upon other barriers that I've seen them face aside from the multitude of everything else that they see.
I think
Yep.
also, and Brenda, maybe you would comment on this. Colleges, both 2 and 4-year colleges, many times think the student that they want to serve is a student that doesn't exist. You know, is a student that existed 30 years ago, but doesn't really exist now. And so there may be individuals at the college level who say, serving people in prison, you know, why are we doing that? Okay. At the same time, those colleges that are best at marketing, which tend to be for-profit institutions, oftentimes provide the least service to the student. And so you get this situation where the colleges that might be the most helpful to the student are not aggressively searching, looking for ways to serve incarcerated individuals.
Yeah, one of the good things that in anticipation of Pell restoration is that for-profit institutions are not eligible their students are not eligible to use their Pell for-profit institutions. But you raise a larger point, Maureen, and then we're going to get to the Q&A questions in the chat, that it's important to even reach out to folks beyond the institutions. And I'm talking specifically about the state higher education officials who can in some ways also work with the Department of Corrections and put in place policies that would support justice impacted learners. So it's a broader coalition of folks, I think, that we're going to have in place in our states and our communities to really make sure we remove all the barriers that Joe Lewis and James talked about. And we know that they are really difficult to overcome. Alan, I'm going to turn it over to you because we're running out of time and I know we have questions in the chat. You're on mute.
I have 2 questions queued up here, and one of them will get at to a little bit of what's in the Q&A. But the first I want to ask, can a corrections department be a recipient of TRIO funding?
Yes. Yes. They couldn't get a student support services grant, but they could get an educational opportunity center grant.
Okay. And so then they could theoretically get that grant and hire staff to provide that service to
Correct.
those. Okay.
But because EOCs have this large number of clients, it would probably have to be at the state level. It couldn't be at one facility.
Yeah. That's helpful. Thank you. Can someone talk a little bit about verification for eligibility? Because we know these funds aren't specifically geared towards system impacted people, but so how do you deal with eligibility?
I don't think eligibility will be a problem. The individual will have to say that their parents did not graduate from college. And the other eligibility, well, EOCs, a third of the people don't have to meet any eligibility criteria. So, but if they want to be in the 2/3, they have to have a low income, which if you're incarcerated, you have a low income, and neither of your parents can have had a baccalaureate degree. But the individual can certify that themselves.
Thank you. I'm just trying to see what questions we have left that have not been answered. How does online program affect any of this stuff? I think that you kind of mentioned a little bit of that, Joe, but if there's anything else we want to add to that.
Well, Pell for Prisoners does allow online classes. That's correct, right? Or hybrid classes.
Yes. Not correspondence, as long as it's distance learning.
Okay. I think it is a matter of and Joe probably is the best person to answer this. You know, what is best for the student, what that is incarcerated, whether that's usually a good option or usually not a good option. Joe, you probably are a good person to respond to that.
I think the online programming that could hinder, right, is if a student was taking at a for-profit institution, like let's say a statistics course that might not transition to maybe one of the higher education systems in that state, right? If like California has the CSU system the UC system, the community college system, if there's no articulation agreement between these for-profit degrees that could give them math courses, English courses, history courses, that are all requirements to attain an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree, I think that's where the hindrance comes in, if there is no real articulation agreement so they could be accepted into those institutions for once they're released, which more likely an SSS program is that, right? It was like at a Cal State Los Angeles or a Mount San Antonio College.
I would also suggest, and maybe James, you can speak to this, that there's limited access to technology in many correctional facilities. So that is a huge obstacle. James, do you want to talk about that and how you've worked to overcome some of those obstacles?
Yes, in the Department of Corrections, I mean, thank God we're finally got approval to put internet in it, but there's been no access to internet inside the Department of Corrections, never mind technology in and of itself. Computers are completely outdated, and we're in the process now of getting all of the computers, the software updated. But for years, it's been difficult for students to have access to anything related to technology. So a lot of our students are coming home and we have to show them how to do an attachment in an email just to attach their resume to apply for employment, never mind navigate Blackboard or other educational systems. So it has been a challenge for our students.
Do you want to talk to that as a DOC person? Is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say that we have had kind of a unique, and it kind of spoke to something that James talked about earlier too, about people not having enough time to finish a program before they release, and the college, the community college that serves the institution, the facility that I am at, has actually, we have like a sustainable energy program, and that's a 2-year program. And what they have worked out with, if you guys can start that program and they release before it's over, they can actually continue it online. They've made it available for them to continue with that college online to finish out the program. And I'll just share very quick. The instructor was telling me that we had someone that just released a few weeks ago, and he was like top in the class, you know, and the instructor on the campus came to him and said, I need to talk about this guy. And he's like, what? He was great. And he said, he's so far ahead of everybody. You know, he's like, what else can I do? What can I do? What can I do? Can I do that? And he said, no, slow down. You know, I'll get the next assignment on Monday. And that instructor shared that at 12:01 a.m. on Monday, he was asking for the next assignments. So, I mean, that's the kind of motivation. They've been real creative, I think, in addressing that, being able to complete the program, you know, and that's not practical, obviously, for maybe a welding program, but that's kind of nice to be able to do that.
So I'm just going to put a plug in here for some advocacy, if I might, Alan, and just say that all the states have access to broadband funding, but must develop a broadband plan. And I suggest that folks who are on this call should be a part of those efforts at the state level and respectfully request that departments of corrections be a targeted entity for broadband expansion. It's just something to think about because it's been a huge obstacle going forward.
I think that these two questions here were answered a little bit, but I want to make sure about student support services being able to focus on currently incarcerated students. I think you mentioned that, Maureen, that would be a challenge, but has anybody tried that? Is it even possible? If folks are trying to do that, what would be the route to be able to do that?
Stephanie, you're responsible for an SSS program. Is there any way you can think about that you'd be able to serve folks who are inside before they come back on campus?
Well, I think it goes back to a little bit of what Maureen said in terms of the demand on campus, but it is something that I'd like to see us be able to do. It would be a challenge though. I think once the Pell is available, that's going to be the first time we'll be able to try it out. But it's going to be the logistics of it all. It's going to be a challenge.
Can someone clarify? I think you touched on this, Maureen, but all of these different EOCs, SSSs, VUBs all fall under TRIO. TRIO is the funding source. You're muted.
Depending on how you count, there was one point in time that there were 3 programs, and that's why they're called the TRIO programs. But now, depending on how you count, there's somewhere between 5 and 7 programs that are all under the TRIO authority. So 2 of those, student support services, EOCs, Veterans Upward Bound, are 3 of the 7.
There is a question about how to apply for this funding.
So each of these TRIO programs is a grant that goes for 5 years. Right now, there are some competitions that are like Veterans Upward Bound hasn't been announced, but will go on this spring. There's a possibility that there'll be a student support services competition next year or the following year. But right now there's no competition scheduled for next year. So, but if we'll stay in touch with Vera so that you can get that information out to your community whenever there is one of the problems with these competitions is the department doesn't give people much notice, but the questions are all available in advance. So we'll stay in touch, Ellen, on hopefully on a range of things and make sure that your community can prepare well in advance for the next competition.
Excellent. So with only 3 minutes left, we have a few more questions that are in the chat, but they're a little more specific to Pell Grant funding and how that works. And so I'm happy to follow up on those later. I just want to give an opportunity for anyone who wants to give some parting words before we have to let our audience go. And then we'll end with Maureen doing that too, because I know we want to close out with you. But if any of our panelists just wanted to say anything before we go, now is a good time to do that.
I know that in the chat, people have been asking for your email addresses so they can reach out directly to you. So I just wanted to make sure you did that because folks were really, really thankful and for your information and have some follow-up questions for you. So please, before you hang up, make sure you give me your email addresses. Thank you.
Sorry, this is Angelica. I was just going to say in the when we send you the recording, we will add any of the panelists' emails that they agree to so that you can reach out to them as well.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Well, before we close with Maureen, I just wanted to also say thank you again to the panelists. You all are amazing. The work that you're doing is invaluable to just making this whole system work and improving what we all try to do. And thank you for this partnership with COE, and thank you for the audience for attending. And then I'll pass it over to you, Maureen. And thanks a lot, Brenda, for partnering with me on this moderation.
And I just want to thank Ellen and Vera. This is something that we know how much potential there is in individuals who are incarcerated or formerly incarcerated. And to waste that potential is a tragedy. So we've got a lot of work to do, and we really appreciate everything that each of you are doing to make this partnership work. Thank you so much.
This is just the beginning of this conversation. So.
And let me just add my thanks as well. And we look forward to subsequent webinars and subsequent ways of connecting each other. Thank you.